Hello, am I okay? Julie? Julie?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, yes. As I was saying that, let me appreciate this opportunity to and welcome this quite progressive program. I know that there was quite a number of people who are asking, shouldn't it be a youth league program or is it any? And the truth of the matter is that it is a youth league program, but we have received a lot of assistance from the ANC. The political school is a political school of the ANC. And hence, that's why the ANC seems to be in the lead. So it is the Youth League and PYA program. And it's quite a good initiative in the main. So what is important about this is that the program brings together a wide range of comrades to bring wide range of ideas to the fore. And it is also an opportunity to learn from each other. An organization that stops learning or stops teaching is an organization that will eventually dissipate. And the ANC in Gauteng province and together with this alliance and the PYA have demonstrated by such program and many other programs that this is an organization with a future. We live in quite a difficult province. We live in an era that is quite, obviously that's forced us to adapt, an era that forced the ANC and the ANC Youth League and the PYA to adapt. And indeed, with this type of initiatives and programs, it's a sign that the organization is adapting to new norms. So with that said, I'm happy, I'm wishing this program to go well. And I know I can't wait to learn from all of yourselves, the PC members of the ANC. I should have acknowledged earlier, Sputla, Tasnim, as well as the leadership of the PYA, all protocol observed. Comrades, I wish you all the best. I'll be online learning like everybody else. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Comrade Batume, for that thoughtful input, particularly also in going ahead to acknowledge who is here today. Today, we are represented by the ANC-PC through Comrade Tasneem, through Comrade Sputla. The PS, Comrade Kawe, will also be following the conversation. And other PC members that are present that I've not acknowledged. We are also represented by the PC of the ANC Youth League. We're represented by regions as well as the NYTT and of the Youth League. We are also represented by the Young Communist League in the province, SASCO in the province, COSAS in the province. We are also represented by government officials who are here, who are also going to be on the program, who will be sharing their ideas with us. With that said, we need to check, is COSAS present, that they can deliver the message of support?
Yes, COSAS is present.
Over to you, COSAS.
Okay. Hello?
We're with you. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, my name is Onkopotsi Maputi Makeli, also known as Stalin. I'm the PC member of COSAS in Gauteng. I was asked today to come and deliver the message of support by our acting provincial secretary of COSAS in Gauteng. Before I can deliver the message of support, I'd like to start by acknowledge the leadership of the ANC as mentioned by Julie, that they are present. The leadership of YCLSA in the province is led by Comrade Khabu. I'm told that Comrade Patu is here, but I'm not sure if he is connected already. Greetings, leadership. Greetings to all the boxers, in fact, and all the judges and the facilitators, all Comrade Julie. Greetings. Greetings to the provincial chairperson of the ANC Youth League in Gauteng, the leadership of the ANC in the province, and the leadership of all the governance structures, and also greetings to membership in general that is present here, that is joining us online. I would like to start by raising a concern from our side as the Congress of South African Students, which is a concern that we have always been raising with the leadership of structures. I think now, because the concern has long been avoided, now since we are here together, can I also raise it here so that it can be noted? Comrades, COSAS, it's also a structure of the MTM structures, and at times we feel like we deserve the right treatment. We must be given the respect that we deserve as the structure and as a component in the PYA. And as time goes, comrades, please try to work with us as a component in the PYA. And we must not be like it's some sort of a favor for us to be in the PYA. It is not. And if it is a favor, comrades feel like they're doing us a favor, they must say so that we see what we do going forward. Because we're a structure and we have our own constituency that we are leading. And it can't be that all the time COSAS is left out in the outside. So comrades, today we are commemorating we are ending, I think it's the last program commemorating the youth of 1976, the Youth Month. It's a red program. It's a red program. It's a relevant one given how we, because it's the first program that is being done online, which is supposed to have all members or as many people as possible, so that we can learn from the speakers today. But one of the challenges that have been raised before for the longest of time, it is one of the reasons why today we find out that we have minimal people who are joining us here online to come and learn from the speakers. The one of data struggles. We know today many of our youth out there are struggling with that, and that is one of the reasons why today, even when we speak here, they won't be able to get the message because of the very same struggle they're talking about that has been raised for over the years. Now, comrades, I think as time goes, we should consider one thing, because as the Congress of South African Students, we strongly feel that when we acknowledge the youth of 1976, we must be clear on one thing as well. Yes, it is the youth in 1976 that went on to raise their concerns, who went on and took it to the streets. But we must acknowledge as well that it was students in particular who were in the forefront of raising concerns, whatever concerns that they were raising in sorry to say whatever concerns, to raise the concerns with the boundary education that was there. Yes, we acknowledge that the unemployment rate was, many young people were unemployed at the time. There were many social ills at the time. But one of in fact, the main issues which were addressed at the time was issues of education. And it was students who were in the forefront of that particular mass. Now, as COSAS, we strongly feel that it will be fair. In 1956, women in South Africa took it to the streets and at Union Building. We acknowledge that day as Women's Day. We acknowledge the day as the Women's Day. We don't just say, we put it as it is. Even though there were other issues that were around or aligned to the struggles of women at that time. But even in 1976, students in particular decided to take it to the street. It is a fact that not every young person went on to participate in those marches and riots, but it was students in particular. And comrades, it will be unfair for me to stop talking or finish talking if we don't mention all the gender-based violence that we see around the world. Comrades, we have been talking for a lot of time, and minimal action has been taken from both local and across the world. Minimum action has been taken to make sure that the culprits are brought into book and account for all the things that we do. Comrades, we wish you from COSAS a very good luck in this session, and we are very prepared to learn from this particular session. Good luck to the boxers, good luck to the judges as well. Thanks, facilitator.
Thank you, Comrade Okhopote from COSAS, for that very thoughtful and insightful message of support. COSAS is a critical element and a critical component of the PYA, but also of the mass democratic movement. And therefore, we are very honored and we're very humbled for that input. Without wasting time, we're going to quickly proceed
as soon as possible.
SASCO. We request, comrades, that you please mute your mics. Comrades of SASCO, we request that you please do present your message of support. Comrade SASCOs. Okay, whilst we get comrades of SASCO settled, can we proceed to the Young Communist League? They will be represented by Comrade Pasha, who will deliver the message of support. Comrade Pasha.
Thanks, Comrade Julie. I'm not sure because the SASCO comrade has just gotten online if we can proceed in this manner. But nonetheless, I think that's fine. We are ready. Let's continue. Let me first also send greetings to the leadership of the African National Congress here with us today. The leadership of the ANC Youth League led by the provincial chair who opened this session for us. Acknowledge also the leadership of COSAS, Comrade Makele, Stalin, Comrade Patu from SASCO, yourself, Comrade Julie, for coordinating this program, and every other leader who is present with us here today. Let me first say that I am feeling a bit, I think I've got flu, but I'm sitting here wishing that it's not the symptoms of corona. Because this week we've just had a lot of cases by the offices there in Ekurhuleni that it is really home, this thing of corona. So I'm hoping that I'm not spared as yet. But equally today, as we are convened here as young people, as we bid farewell to the month of June, which is commonly known as Youth Month, that emanates from that historic day in June 1976, where young people decided that enough is enough. They're going to hold the bull by the horns and confront an unjust system that has been oppressing them for a very long time. We need to acknowledge the fact that those young people came in unison. They drove the message of unity, of bravery, and of saying that if the issues are confronting us, it's not us who are going to stand up and do it for ourselves, then nobody else will. And it's in those bases that each and every year we commemorate 16th of June and dedicate the whole month towards running programs that actually remind young people that the struggle continues. It might have been unfortunate that this year, given the material conditions where we are faced with the international or the global pandemic of COVID-19, we were not able to actually run our programs as much as we could have. But actually, we appreciate this program that you comrades have decided to salvage what is left of it and convene us here today. I'm saying all these things because going forward, it will be the spirit of unity that needs to be emulated from that 1976 generation, because we are still facing a lot of challenges that that generation faced. Only they've become much more prevalent now, which will need all of us to stick together. The first thing I will say is that the challenges of what has happened, what we have seen happening in the primary schools and high school in the education sector, where we have seen how our education system was not actually as much prepared as they thought they were. We open schools today, tomorrow one is closed because one person has caught the COVID-19. You open two and then tomorrow others and all those things. So it's a merry-go-round. But we have to sit here today and say that that must not be a struggle that is faced only by comrades of COSAS, but all of us must stick together and say that we must not allow our schools and young people to be a laboratory where we want to test whether the issue of COVID is a winnable issue or not, because we are turning our schools into slaughterhouses. Therefore, those are the kind of issues that need solidarity for all of us. And equally, the issues of the higher learning, where we know that it is the battle of those who have and those who do not have. When we close the institution of higher learning and we're saying young people must go back to their homes and try to continue with the system from home, we're actually setting young people against each other. Those who are in the townships, in the suburbs, and those who are in the rurals of the rurals, where there is not even a network, and we are saying the system must continue. And I think that these are the kind of issues that need a unison of the Progressive Youth Alliance. So we don't send SASCO alone to fight those kind of things as if like they are only members of SASCO or leadership of SASCO that is being impacted by those kind of unfortunate things. But equally, what we have seen now with the issues of the gender-based violence, the scourge that has actually befallen us, we are aware that this foreign tendency, heartbreaking issues, happen in a very systematic way, that it comes in and become very much prevalent, and then it dies out for a year or two, and only to come back as if like it's a fashionable thing for us to say we are moving from piano to Tom and all those kind of things. But this is a kind of a challenge that for us as young people, if we are saying that we are advocating for a socialist material conditions, where we first need to come in solidarity as Black people to say we are confronting the issues of capitalism, it looks like we first need to come together and say, how do we convince each other that we are one as men and women? Because it cannot be that we are sitting idle and we're not doing anything when this kind of a foreign tendency is everywhere in our streets, in our homes, and impacting on our comrades on a daily basis. I think lastly, let's say that we have noted how government has actually came in and say and announced that there will be a 50 billion budget that will deal with the pandemic of COVID-19. But only last week, when the Minister of Finance came in, announced a reduction of that amount to 41 billion, which for us as Young Communist League, we look at that thing as an announcement that only this is the survival of the best immune system. Because once you reduce resources to deal with a pandemic that has befallen us, you are saying that you are actually going to reduce the amount that is dedicated towards fighting this scourge. And it cannot be a good thing that we celebrate. And as young people, we need to rally together to say, how do we fight this kind of a thing? Because when we look at the issues of saying the grant of 350
Comrade of YCL, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you have less than a minute left. If you can please wrap up.
No, thank you. So we are saying that we need to come in unison to speak about these issues collectively. There must not be separate issues that affect Young Communist League, separate issues that affect YCL, SASCO, COSAS, and so on. So we appreciate this platform that we're given today for us to come in together Lastly, when I looked at this thing called Bosso, Mang, and I was like, I hope this is not something to say young people are going to battle with each other. We see who wins. But we are saying Bosso, Mang, as if like as united as young people, we can fight our challenges together, learn from each other, be one thing. Let this not be the last that we have, but moving forward, even outside of June 16, let the PYA in Gauteng come united and confront our issues together. In those few words, I'm saying, Pele comrades, the ones who are going to come and present to us, we are willing to learn from you. Let us engage and be united. Forward with Progressive Youth Alliance and Gauteng, forward.
Forward indeed. Thank you very much, Comrade of SASCO. If you can come in, please note you have less than 3 minutes to do your message of support. We'd like to also welcome the Provincial Secretary, Comrade Jacob Kawe of the ANC, who has now joined us. Comrades of SASCO, over to you.
Thank you, Comrade Julie. I hope I'm audible enough. More than most of our message of support has been covered by other PYA components. But first and foremost, strengthened unity. We meet objectives of whatever sector we lead, and in this point, youth-based problems. As SASCO, we are embarking on a program where institutions of higher learning are returning back to their respective campuses. We are faced with COVID on two folds. The first one being the fact that it had stopped the academic calendar and ensured that people who are in their respective institutions have to return back to their places of dwelling. While that has happened, what we also identified is that a system of online learning has happened and is being imposed. And as SASCO, what we believe in central is that the doors of learning should be accessible to all that live in the country. And we've seen that online learning presents us with a challenge where some people are marginalized, particularly students, from participating from online learning for multiple challenges. The first being access to the sort of infrastructure that they need to access online learning. SASCO, we've cried about network connectivity, we've cried about students not having the sufficient gadgets, and we've cried about the environments that they find themselves in going into online learning. So we say at SASCO, we fully need the support of other PYA components, ensuring that we open up doors of learning to everyone, and we ensure that we expand the capacity of institutions of learning to take in more students and to ensure that even when they do go online, the issue of access does not become a problem. This is where we aim to give away laptops, as SASCO has cried for years and years, that one student, one laptop, so that it does happen, and then we ensure that learning becomes accessible. But however, this is not free the PYE components to come and assist as COSAS to ready learners from high school to transition easily and understand the struggles that exist in institutions of higher learning are no different from problems that exist in high schools. We need to further understand the youth league and run concurrent programs with the youth league, like having free Wi-Fi, which we've seen that the DA had stopped in both Johannesburg and in Pretoria. The access of the free Wi-Fi at the time would have been very critical at times like this, where students need the internet continuously to connect and to stay online and do their work as they should. But however, that has not been possible in status quo. We asked the Youth League to assist SASCO in championing these battles back in the respective communities to ensure that we find ourselves as the PYA being central to discussions that are related to anything that is youth-based. We further asked the YCL to continue sharp iron to give us a clear ideological posture on giving us further tools of analysis diagnose society and understand what the problems of society are, so that we can come with feasible solutions that will assist our
Okay,
peers.
comrades of SASCO, you have less than a minute left.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Julie. But in conclusion, what we want to achieve and create an ideal society is only possible when young people are working together and singing one tune. So all PYA that we have a feasible program of actually dealing with first we can't, that we have the ability to change. Thank you, Comrade Julie.
Thank you, comrades of SASCO. I'm going to unfortunately have to cut you off. And as we need to begin the actual battle. In the box that we're going to have currently is a panel in relation to infrastructure development and the digital economy towards rebuilding the economy firstly, but also creating jobs for young people. Young people are hungry currently and vastly affected by not only the pandemic, but already the situation was exacerbated with the economic recession that we face. So I'm going to now hand over to Comrade Sarah, who is the judge, jury, and executioner for the session, who will facilitate the boxing ring between Comrade Sputla as well as Comrade Dineo. Over to you.
Thank you, Comrade Julie. Good afternoon, comrades. As I've been introduced, my name is Sarah Mukwebo. I'm an RTT member of the Youth League in Ekurhuleni. So how it's going to work for this round is that I am going to be presenting questions to both boxers who are then going to respond to, and this has to be in light of the limited time that we have. So I am going to start with Comrade Khosien Tsuramukhopa, also known as Dr. Sputla, who is the head of infrastructure investment at Presidency. And to also introduce the other boxer, it's Ms. Dineo Stole, who's currently the provincial treasurer of the YCL in Gauteng. So, Comrade Sputla, I'm going to start with you, and I just want you to tell us about the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium that you held about a week ago.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation, and congratulations for staging this platform exchange ideas. And I think the significance of June 16, at least in the current time, is that it gives us an opportunity to provide a balance sheet of the struggle, the degree to which we have been able to advance what our forebears. So I think we give you a resounding applause. So essentially what we are attempting to do was to ensure that we stimulate aggregate demand. And you know that as to stimulate aggregate demand, or at least the classics suggest that we are likely going to resuscitate the supply side. And when I talk about supply side, I'm talking about the construction industry that has been decimated over a period of time. And you know that when we went to NASREC, the elective conference, one of the things that we addressed there was what will be, if you like, the pillars of the second phase of the transition. And one of the issues we had raised there was the need to localize. And on the back of that localization effort, you are able to broaden the industrial base, and therefore you are going to absorb the supply side. So it is important that I explain it in this way, because infrastructure is not an outcomes neutral effort. So it is meant to achieve a particular set of political objectives. And in this instance, it's about the qualitative transformation of society. It's about tampering with both the production and ownership patterns in the country. And essentially what we're attempting to do was also to ensure that the aspirational targets of the National Development Plan. So the NDP, if you like, is a blueprint for development in this country, although it emanated from government, when we were in Mangaung, we adopted it as our own document that will begin to enunciate the pathway to achieve a South Africa that we want. So I've referenced the strategy and tactics document as it talks to the second phase of the transition. And I've also referenced the NDP. So it is important that in the discipline of the conversation and the discussion, we remain within the parameters of what we have agreed as what will define our struggle going forward. So the point I was making is that there's a need to industrialize. And then we said that we need to isolate or prioritize sectors that will help us to achieve the objectives of the NDP. And remember, what the NDP instructs us to do is that you must address what we call gross fixed capital formation. In simple terms, it's investments into the country. And it says that that gross fixed capital formation should be at 30% of GDP. And I think that's a standard for developing countries if they want to achieve some bold and aggressive developmental targets as we have them codified in the National Development Plan. And so we know that the government has not been investing sufficiently. We know that the private capital is being hawked by the private sector. There's lack of confidence in relation to the economy in the country. So you need to unlock, if you like, domestic liquidity. So that's lazy money that is sitting, and we could be exploiting it to achieve our developmental objectives. So essentially what the SEEDS was doing was to bring public sector and private sector together. And we also identified the priority sectors. So these priority sectors are what we call the network industries. Is water, it's energy, it's transport, and it's ICT infrastructure. And let me tell you what is significant about these network industries is that one, they've got greater levels of or superior multiplier effects. So the employment absorption capacity of these sectors is greater than other sectors, comparatively speaking. They are able to introduce greater levels of efficiencies in the economy. So when I talk about efficiencies, I'm talking about helping us to achieve our sustainable development goals, because it will help us to ensure that we achieve the objective of a just and green transitions as we bring down fossil, the emissions, the greenhouse emissions, and go towards renewables. They are able to help us to open new corridors. So if you like, linking major economic centers so that the economy functions as a single ecosystem. They are able to also provide the access, if you like. So earlier on, I think our comrades from SASCO were making a valid point that and COSAS by making a valid point that one of the acute failures of a democratic state have been surfaced during the COVID pandemic. So learners can learn online. I mean, the kind of privilege that we have here, they can enjoy it. So it is important that we're able to extend the connectivity. And one of the things that I think the PYA must
can I just stop you for a moment, Comrade Sputla, so that I move to Comrade Dineo and then we'll come back again to you.
You have given me the time to say how long. Okay, no, that's fine.
So no worries. I'll just interrupt once in a while because I'm unable to use the timer because I'm using my phone for Zoom. Comrade Dineo, if you were to tell us what were your expectations of what you've heard and learned about the infrastructure symposium that was held at Presidency. If you were to tell us from the perspective or the point of view of being a young person, what your expectations were of the symposium.
Thanks, Comrade Sarah. Greetings, comrades. My name is Dineo Todd, as mentioned. I must appreciate the input by Comrade Sputla. But I think when I was listening and really looking at the symposium, so one of the things that kept this, he said, in furthering infrastructure development as an avenue to rebuild the economy, we wanted to ensure that there was greater participation of Black players, industrialists, communities located in villages, rural areas, and townships. But he does not mention youth. as critical to the infrastructure development. So that for me was something that was lacking. I would have liked to see how the participation of young people within infrastructure development and the digital economy would have come up. Because right now it affects us, and he rightfully states that the impact of COVID-19 has showed the disparities of the digital divide, access to ICT material, and to internet, to data, and of course it's also shown how they are not consistent. There are areas that get network correctly and others that don't. So all of these disparities that are there, and this is all on the basis of infrastructure, would have liked to see the input of how young people would like to happen. And one of the things that also came up, because as soon as you start speaking about infrastructure development and speak about investments and what the NDP wants, which was agreed on, yes, thankfully, you have to speak about the connection to education and skill development in this critical space. Because either way, if you don't have the educated necessary skill development that comes from the youth, the employment, whether it's there, will not have a sustainable and long-term impact. And I think the whole point of the IIO as well is to ensure that there's a sustainable, agile, and progressive youth participation within the industry. I also would have liked to hear, I think he rightfully states the impacts of capitalism and monopoly in this structure, which has been a huge problem. But what I wanted to understand is how then do we change these structural problems that have been impeding on young people being able to get into dealing with these input costs, your electricity, data, and transport, your spatial development, and the market concentration. What are the views of the symposium, or how do they say we should deal with those? And I think lastly, it's just really an assessment of how the infrastructure development in South Africa has been happening. So yes, there's been a decision taken to focus on it, but it doesn't begin now. There has been a lot of infrastructure development that has started from 2009, with huge budgets being given for infrastructure development. But we still have systems that are not working properly. There's no system of maintenance of infrastructure being built to sustain the economy, to sustain even what we are building towards a system that will benefit society and that will ensure that we participate in governance. I think I'll stop there for now, if you don't mind. And I'll
Thank you. I was about to actually stop you. So I'm going to go back to Comrade Sputla. And this is the question that I now have for him, is that during the symposium, as well as during his line of work, what have been the areas that they've identified as areas that need dire youth participation, as well as that have been earmarked for youth development? And this is outside of the overemphasized and under-delivered 30% procurement provision, where youth are expected to fall under.
Maybe let me make the following point. So earlier on when I spoke, I said infrastructure is not outcomes neutral.
Yes.
And I've said that I reference this from the strategy and tactics document, and I also reference the NDP. So the kind of issues that were raised earlier on, they follow that there must be fundamental alteration of the economic relations of society. So I don't have to regurgitate what the NDP says. I don't have to regurgitate what the strategy and tactics says. I've moved from the premise that there's a complete appreciation of what it says. So that's the first point. The second one is if you look at the strategy and tactics that we adopted in NASREC, on the chapter where it essentially begins to elaborate on the motive forces. When it speaks of young people, it says that, I quote, "They are lightning rod for disruptive change." So why am I quoting that? I'm quoting it because you don't have to wait to be invited to come and participate in the infrastructure space. You must claim your stake from outside. So there must be a coherent and compelling articulation advanced by young people around what is it that they see as their role and place in the unfolding space of infrastructure. So you don't have to wait for the state. You don't have to wait for some office somewhere to say that this is your place. But I'm just saying there has to be that aggressive articulation on your part. So as opposed to asking about what are you doing about this, what are you doing about that, I think what is instructive is the need for us, young people, to begin to articulate what they think is in their collective interest, and therefore continue.
Can
the
I
next
just interject a bit there, Comrade Sputler? You are saying that the youth need to be the ones that come in and say, this is what we want. But then how many types of youth, or how many youth actually have access to all these areas and platforms and institutions that actually allow them to speak for themselves and their needs? Because as we are here, as the youth that are currently in conversation with you, we are considered the privileged youth that are currently able to have this conversation with you. But then what about other youth that do not even know that there's actually now a unit called Head of Infrastructure Investment and Presidency? How are their needs then attended to, if it's going to be on a basis where if they say what their needs are, then we're going to address them? Why is it not coming from the leaders and everyone else who is sort of like at the helm of this whole thing to say, these are the types of needs that we think our youth have, and this is how we think we can address them?
Oh, I'm making an elementary assumption that part of youth activism is exactly that. That even before the doors are open for you, you push those doors, you open them. So that's a part of a disruptive change that I'm talking about. But let me respond to the more qualitative question. So I thought that I must make that point. And I'm making that point in the context of the celebration of June 16. So that generation of young people did not have to wait for the powers that be to continue to prosecute essentially what was an unjust system. But they were able to rise and ensure that they addressed that. So that's the first, the one question that I was raising. So essentially in the articulation of how we want to roll out the infrastructure, like I said, it's not outcomes neutral. So we have said that we must be able to industrialize on the back of that. So there must be some degree of designations to say that as you build roads, as you build dams, as you reconstruct the collapsing municipal infrastructure, especially water infrastructure, one, local communities need to participate. Women and young people need to participate. And when I say participate, I'm not just talking about at the level of accessing tenders, if you like, but I'm talking about the ownership and production pattern. And that's why I keep on going back when I started. So it's in the discipline of my articulation, is that I am referencing this from the second phase of the transition. You remember that we talk about the radical socio-economic transformation, and we have articulated in the most comprehensive fashion what we mean by that. And we have placed young people, blacks, at the center of those struggles, and essentially they're the ones who stand to benefit the most, because we also have come to accept that they're the ones that are penalized the most. So I'm just saying, on the back of that industrialization and participation of young people, so the means of production must be with young people. So essentially, we're looking at creating spaces for young people to provide inputs that are required for us to do this massive build program. So you'll hear when the president announces it, it's into the tens and billions of rands. Part of the collaboration that we're having with the private sector in producing a credible project pipeline is to ensure that we protect the interest of young people, blacks and women in particular, to say that they must participate in the most meaningful fashion in the value chain. So it's not about the construction of a road, it's about the infrastructure, the aggregate, the bitumen, who gets to own that. So we are talking with the DFIs, development financial institutions, the IDC, to be more specific here, to design, if you like, funding instruments that they will not burden young people and blacks in particular to participate in that space. And we're also saying the state must be aggressive. You must be able to guarantee offtakes from these industries so that they are able to thrive. So there's guaranteed earnings and incomes going into the future. And then on the back of that, we are able to raise money from the DFIs. And we're saying that those terms must be favorable. So they must not be looking at your track record on how you use money, but essentially it's about the state guaranteeing that there will be offtakes. And then as I conclude, part of the points that we're making there is that there has to be a meaningful articulation in relation to this kind of skills that are required to deliver on what we call the National Infrastructure Plan. So what was presented at the seeds is projects that are shovel ready immediately, but we are working on producing an infrastructure plan that has got a 25-year horizon. And then for us to be able to deliver on that, you need to articulate the kinds of skills that are required. And here I'm talking about the artisanal skills. So comrades from SASCO will tell you, so we celebrate those comrades that are universities. We frown upon those that are from TVETs. But if you look at the most successful economies, Germany in particular, South Korea, you'll find that is built on the back of artisanal skills. So you are welders, you are plumbers. And I'm talking about precision welders, plumbers. Those are the people that are able to drive the economies of those spaces. So I'm not talking about people who will be sitting in the boardroom, asset managers and the like. These economies and transformation will be built on the degree to which you are able to produce that pipeline of artisanal skills. And I think that's a reconsideration on how we see infrastructure going into the future. Thanks.
Which speaks to the point Comrade Dineo had raised, that when we talk about infrastructure development, we need to also make a connection between education and skill development. Comrade Sputla, I have one last question for you before I then take it back to Comrade Dineo and then we close this round. And my question is that, have you perhaps imagined or thought as far as trying to understand as well youth as the end users of the sort of infrastructure that we're going to develop as a country? Because often, sometimes when things are developed, what thought is hardly given to the people that will eventually become the end users. It's like, for example, building a housing unit, and then you have 2 sets of steps and you forget that we need a ramp because it might happen that that house is occupied by someone with a disability. So I just want to find out if a lot of thought is also given to the infrastructure that we develop, if the thought, rather, let me say, if a lot of thought is given into youth being end users of the infrastructure that we now develop, because we know that also infrastructure projects it's not something that usually takes a year, or even seeing the benefits of it coming up in a year. It can take 10 years, it can take 20, it can even take 50. So I just wanted to find out on your side, more especially as a person who is the head of infrastructure development, if that kind of thing is given consideration.
Oh, no, thank you very much. Yes. Okay. So essentially it's about also the reconfiguration of the space. So let me give you a typical example. So in the country, you have people who are commuting long distances from places of residence, accessing economic opportunities. So it's not uncommon in the country for someone to spend up to 2 hours just commuting between home and places of economic activity. I'm thinking here in the immediate, I mean, people who are from Kwandebele working here in Pretoria East and parts of Pretoria, people moving from the south of Johannesburg working in Sandton. So that undermines the quality of life. They have to leave the house when kids are sleeping and they come back when kids are sleeping. And then they, like I said, they spend an inordinate amount of time traveling. But it also eats into their disposable income. So it's not uncommon in the country for people to spend up to 68% of their income just on paying for travel. So why am I raising those points with regards to the end users? So essentially that's the reconfiguration of the space to ensure that people work and play in the same space. So we are creating greater densities, and I think Gauteng lends itself to that, because we occupy 2% of the land mass and we account for about 25% of the total population in the country. So higher levels of density. So people must be able to work closer to where they stay. And then you are also going to reduce your emission levels because you are not traveling in those distances. And then there's something that Comrade Parks has done in his former capacity as a mayor there in Johannesburg. So we're looking at forms of non-motorized transport, so walking and cycling. I think those are the kind of things that you want to introduce so that people have got access to services, people are able to travel lesser distances, you are improving their quality of life. And that's why, as I conclude at the beginning, I said that the first starting point, you must deal with the network industries. You must deal with water, transportation, ICT, infrastructure and energy. Those are the things that are going to help you to open up the economy and make it possible for you to reconfigure the space in the manner that we are envisaging it, so that you are able to undermine in the most decisive fashion the morphology of apartheid and how it's organized. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Comrade Sprutla rather. Comrade Dineo, this is the last question to you. And this is going to be based on the response that Comrade Sprutla now gave when I asked about the end users, youth as the end users of infrastructure. What kind of development do you think young people need now and also in the near future? Infrastructure development, that is.
I think many things. I mean, really, the things that Comrade Sprutla had mentioned right now were very clear. I mean, we're also looking at the issues of water, of electricity, of ICT as a whole. We need to have a well-functioning ICT broadband infrastructure that can assist the youth in education, that can assist the youth in movement as well. We have to, I think the youth definitely need better transport systems, definitely, and I fully agree with that, which is something that we mentioned. We need microeconomic policies and transformational education that can assist us in terms of infrastructure. When we're building things, it has to be in pursuit of this people economy that can sustain young people, that can sustain their movement in society. As well as, I think, I mean, there's a number of things, human settlement as well, which is very important. Agro businesses, creating spaces for us that can be conducive to growth, to movement, to being able to get the necessary skill to deal with the issues of society. So I think the youth infrastructure in particular right now, what needs to happen, that needs to be focused on, is making it possible. These endpoints, your transport, your data, your electricity are very important for youth to be able to do what they need to do, whether it's hosting a business or owning the means of production, as well as just really living in a society that's livable. Yeah, I mean, the clarity of the sewer systems must be just rehabilitated. Electricity must be beneficial to the society, you know. So I think definitely the youth just needs better urban planning as well. It can't be poor, it can't be something that just happens as a response. And we need also to check the responses that have been made for infrastructure development thus far, and look at what the problems were, where we can better improve. Young people cannot just be employed to be informal, precarious workers. They have to be workers that are going to be sustainable, that will be there in the long term. And we have to build things that will last even beyond where we are right now. Sure.
Thank you so much, Comrade Dineo, and thank you, Comrade Sprutla, for your time as well as for your knowledge. Comrade Julie, this is where we end as the first round of the boxing match, and I'm handing it back to you. Thank you. Comrade Julie, you are up.
Sorry, Julie just gone out. Fasia is ready.
Okay.
Maybe let's just allow her to present.
Hi, comrades, Fasia here. Comrade Julie will be joining us in a moment, but just for the sake of time, we're going to move to the next panel just for now. And I'm very lucky to be the referee or the facilitator of this panel, which is really just going to be titled the role that youth and student activism has played towards South Africa's social policy and youth development. Initially, it was going to be myself, Comrade Patu, and then also Comrade Vuyo. Unfortunately, Comrade Vuyo has a bereavement, and the person who is meant to replace Comrade Vuyo, Comrade Tabiso, I'm not sure is on the line. Comrade Tabiso, are you there? I think he may not be, but we have Comrade Patu with us now. Comrade Patu, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, Comrade Fasia.
Okay, great. I can't see you, but I think that may be an internet thing on my side. right, so one of the ways in which we were going to do it was to have two panelists, and they were kind of going to go head to head in what would have been a bit of a boxing match. But this format will be a bit different now because, but what's interesting about it is that youth and student activism, you know, has also become a bit of a buzzword and become a bit of a, you know, a very sort of, inverted commas, popular thing to start doing. But I think we don't really unpack on what activism actually is and what it actually means, you know, to society and to young people. So let's start there. What are your thoughts on what activism actually is? Or where does it take us?
Thank you, Comrade Fass. For me, youth and student activism is about two things. The first one is about sacrifice, when individual takes time out from their day-to-day runnings to ensure that they impact society positively. And on the second fold, what I think activism is the ability to diagnose a problem that exists in society, and upon that diagnosis of the problem, also have the capacity to give solutions for the problem that does exist in that specific society. So activism altogether is a contribution of one's personal time and workspace, whichever space they occupy, to ensure that they do have an impact on society holistically. So we can make reference to a lot of activism that has happened previously. For example, the 68 generation, the 76 generation. Currently, we're seeing Black Lives Matter. In student politics, we're seeing fees must fall. And recently, the access fight in terms of computers, data, and so forth, to ensure that students do actually get access to education. So that is what I see as activism, as an ability to touch and change people's lives through those points I've given you.
Yeah, and I mean, what we've seen also throughout history really is young people being agitators for change. You know, you can trace quite an interesting link. I mean, you can even look at 1968, you can give more recent stuff like the Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, fees must fall, and even now, like you mentioned, the fight around access towards online education, given the fact that COVID has pushed us beyond that point. But I want to talk a little bit now about upward social mobility. And the reason why I want to talk about it is really because when you unpack social policy, a lot of people, I think, tend to think that it's just of why we do that. What is the ultimate point of that engagement? And that's why I talk for us, especially for everyone listening at home, because we use all of these words, but do we actually ever make sense of it?
So for me, Comrade Fass, upward social mobility is about moving from one level of your life to the next one. This could be financially, this could be politically, this could be on a social level, and etc. This means that you need to gain access to specific resources to ensure that you bring about change in your own life and bring about change in the society and have influence in the society that you occupy. So for example, the impact that you have as a primary school learner is different from the impact you'd have as a secondary school learner, similar to when you move to university. The moment you start earning money, the moment you get a job, the moment you start a business, the level of impact that you have in society is quite different because of the level of contribution that you get to make to society. So upward social mobility for me is just about having the capacity to influence the society that you exist in firstly, but also to bring about change in that society through in business, you could give people jobs while you work. You can start empowering people in your family to go to school and have that sort of influence around it. The same does happen politically, that when one person moves up into political spaces, for example, leading your branch, leading your region, all the way to leading the province, means that the level of influence that you have in that particular society has been one that has been well received and one that is that has an impact. Did you get that, Comrade Fast?
Okay, sorry about that. I got that. We were just checking if Comrade Riso had in fact logged on, but I'm not quite sure. So we're just going to continue because of time. So initially what we were going to do was have different, you know, in boxing, you have different rounds. And I was going to put a statement forward and we were going to debate the statement. So I'll still put the statement forward, but we'll only get some views, not all. Recently, we've seen across the world, particularly in Scandinavian countries and in America, we've seen this idea of a universal basic income, or what we would call a UBI. And it's been debated by Democrats, it's been debated by the progressive left, etc., etc. Do you think that UBI is an option in South Africa, especially given our very high youth unemployment rate?
I definitely think so, because if you look at how South Africa is modeled as a state, it's modeled as a social welfare state. So what they want to do is they want to take from the state and those that can, and give those that can't, to ensure that they have access and they have the ability to make a difference and bring change upon their life. So maybe just to make universal basic income as simple as possible, what universal basic income is in essence is it's all people in the state that exist in the country that should be given a portion of amount monthly that allows them to cover their day-to-day expenses or monthly expenses. So this is maybe buying roll-on, buying face cloths and so forth, to ensure that what they need as basics, as basic human beings to survive, is afforded to them, right? So South Africa so far has used a social welfare state, has used different policies in ensuring that people do get access to this. This is more specifically about grants and how those grants have been broken down. So you've got the child grant, you've got the old age grant, you've got the disability grant, and so forth. So what universal basic income does holistically is it puts everyone on a fair scale and say that you as human beings need some income that will deal with the basic necessities that you have on a day-to-day basis. That would be very applicable in South Africa, because the one thing we can't run away from is the fact that we're transitioning into more of an e-commerce platform. So what Andrew Yang, who was a presidential candidate in the United States, argued that for us to have a successful universal basic income in the United States, what we need to do is increase taxations of private companies. So who are going to go into robotics, tax companies that use inbuilt obsolescence planning a higher rate, so that we can redirect and rechannel that money into universal basic income. So that way, what we can do is we can work on taxation basis to increase the state coffers so that we can be able to provide to everyone. But the secondary debate that has come with universal basic income is that how then do you afford to put each and every single human being on the same level and offer them a basic income as if you don't recognize the class that they belong in. So this would be that bourgeoisies who are worth billions would still get the very same 1.5 thousand that someone who stays in an informal settlement would get. So on principle, that is not a fair distribution of resources, seeing where people are positioned in society. But what we need to do is we need to reform what universal basic income is to fit the context of South Africa. Because it's not fair to just take any social development policy and translate it into what Scandinavian countries like Norway, which has probably the fairest societies in the world, and want to apply it with the same principles in South Africa. So we need to adapt those principles, and we need to adapt universal basic income to ensure that it is one that is accommodative within South Africa, and to ensure that it is one that South Africans would be able to identify and understand.
In fact, that was going to be where I was going to hit you on, to say that we can't exactly just import policy from you know, countries that have very small populations, but very high GDP and a very high tax base. But I think you've dealt with that quite well. One of the big things that I think we often don't look at, and I say this also as an MPL, that when we create social policy, we don't quite look at its direct impact, particularly on women and particularly young women. And the reason why I say that is we're quite well aware that gender-based violence affects women. Of course, we cannot run away from it. You know, we're all under severe threat. But is there, or let me rephrase that, how are we able to engage as not just lawmakers, but really with the state around creating social policy that centers young women in particular?
I particularly think that what we need to diagnose as society is that we exist in a very patriarchal society. I'll make reference to India, where rape was not particularly viewed as a big deal, and was you know, people would get away with rape cases that should have no business. They have no business getting away with, until the formation of what is called the Galubi gang in India, which was women who looked for social justice if the legal system had failed them. The biggest problem we've had with making legislation, making policy that is surrounded and centered around women is that we generally don't have the necessary discourse. We don't give women the necessary platforms to have discourse about women-based issues, and they don't particularly participate in these decisions. That's why South Africa and most political parties have taken the stance of saying that we should have 50-50 representation with a quota and so forth. But the problem yet again with quota is that people view quotas as the minimum entry level. So if you say that the Youth League should have 40% women who are represented, the assumption is that post 40% you can't accommodate a woman. But you can accommodate a woman because quotas aren't maximalistic, they are minimalistic. They say this is what is the bare minimum that is expected to you. If you make more contributions, then that's fine. So the policy development has excluded women, and even in the inclusion of women, what you generally find is that women are used as tokens within these processes, not necessarily as people whose voices should be heard to the large extent. So this is why, on principle, we need inclusivity and meaningful inclusivity, not just to say people should participate, but people should participate, and in their participation would have a bearing. And this is maybe the biggest problem. And what I'll throw back to you, maybe to understand, or maybe to get an understanding from you, is as a young MPL, don't you feel that do you have executive powers or not, do you have powers to bring any meaningful change in the space that you occupy? Or as a young MPL, the youngest, by the way, do you feel like a token in the space that is used to appease youth voices?
I think it's a fundamental question, and it's something to ask myself every single day. And the nature, at least, of this boxing is that we, you know, having it out in that sense. But look, I think it is a genuine danger, especially if one just performs a checkbox exercise. We have some young women, we have some young people, we have some women separating those different categories. And I think the challenge for us, particularly as young people, is now that we have a seat at the table, how do we ensure that that voice, or your voice, youth voices, are taken seriously in the decision-making process? How do we ensure that when you sit there, you're not just, you know, like you said, appeasing the quota system? And one of the ways in which I think we do that, there's a few. The first is that we always have to be ahead of our game. We have to be even better read than a lot of the members of the committee. I think you have to do even more oversight. You have to do even more work, which unfortunately is a burden that many women and many young people, marginalized groups, have to go through. But I think also, to the credit of ANC Gauteng and the ANC in general, I think that they've started to see that that kind of process is not going to work. So even now, as a young person, I'm currently the acting chairperson of economic development. They've also given me the responsibility of a shadow chairperson of OGPOL. So we're starting to see spaces in which young people are given more responsibility and given more decision-making powers, but it's an everyday struggle. It's not something we're going to overcome in one term. It's going to bring more young people into the space so that we're not just one voice or two voices. We can come in as a plethora of voices and start to really make even more meaningful change. But I appreciate sort of that question, Patu, because whenever anyone takes any position, we must never be beyond reproach. I think last thing, I think time's almost over, even though we were only two. Last thing, politicians, comrades, everybody, we like to say youth development. We must fund youth development. It's our thing. It's such a buzzword. What do people mean? What should we mean when we talk about youth development?
Thank you, Vas. I think youth development, more than most, is not viewed as a holistic concept, but is viewed as young people getting jobs, young people occupying political spaces. But it's everything together at the same time. It's that young people should take over in political spaces. Young people should take over in governance. Young people should take over in any area they get to participate in and make a meaningful contribution. So when we speak of youth development, it's saying that every youth in every position that they occupy, they should be afforded the space and opportunity to grow in that space. May be skills, it may be young people becoming CEOs, young people becoming premiers, and so forth. So the development within itself is a holistic concept that needs that needs government's intervention, right? And more importantly, when it comes to youth development, there's something that I think the government does miss here and there that they should work is that they should work on a relief mechanism for young people who are in the missing middle, who have started working and have a lot of responsibilities. So from student activism, what I've learned is that you find a student who's applying for NAFSAS, but their family can't afford to take them to school. But because of black tax and other responsibilities that they had to carry into because of the injustices of the apartheid government, what then happens is that that person does not, as a young person who is now the winner of bread, who deals with bread and butter issues at their households, does not receive state relief in dealing with those problems. So maybe we should also, working with social development, find a social policy that will assist individuals like that, because young people and having that burden leads them to fulfilling their potential as young people because of the responsibilities they do get to carry. And when they do get to a level where they are at a specific age, they can't achieve what they've set out to achieve because now someone who's younger wants to occupy that space. So we must find relief mechanisms, not just for the downtrodden people, but also for people who are transitioning and going through upward social mobility, as we spoke earlier on, that we keep them on that positive trajectory, and then that positive trajectory does not lead to them being victims of not being recognized as people that need help because they're in the missing middle or they're in the middle class. So I think we need to navigate those spaces as well in dealing with youth development and youth and social policy holistically.
Thanks, Patu. And I think I take complete and full cognizance of the fact that we can no longer use buzzwords, that we actually have to put the meat on top of the bone in actual, in an effort to really change society. And I think we can have an entire whole discussion around black tax and how it continuously holds people back, and how in South Africa, and we spoke about this around UBI, around how we need to create more specific policy and more tailor-made policy because we're in a very unique position. And for those who didn't know, we're actually considered, inverted commas, a middle income country, which means we don't necessarily benefit from some of the other aid and the other things that come from being a lower income country. And the reason why this is important is because when we do our policy making, when we look at our implementation, we need to understand to a large extent we are on our own. We're not going to get support from other spaces that other poorer countries would have. I think time might have gotten the better of us, but we know the conversation doesn't end here. And we'll continue going forward. And hopefully in the next discussion, we'll have all of our panelists here so we can actually kind of have our boxing match in the future. But thank you to everyone. Thank you, Comrade Patu. Thank you, Comrade Julie. I'm going to hand over back, and thanks to everyone at home for listening in.
Thank you very much, Comrade Fasia. I think you've raised a very critical point towards the end. The video recording of this Zoom session will be flighted on social media pages. So we still request comrades in the box to please go in and answer questions, should there be any questions on social media that come up. But definitely the battle continues, it's not the end. With that said, I'm going to hand over to Comrade Lucky. Comrade Lucky, are you there?
Thank you, Julie.
Okay, over to you. The topic in relation to the law and the justice system in dealing with matters of gender-based violence and femicide.
Thank you. Indeed, our topic for this segment is law and justice against femicide. Femicide is what is known as killing of women and girls or perceived female person based on their gender identity by men. On our panel, we are joined by Comrade Kabo Morefi from the Young Communist League of South Africa, and Comrade Shamalan Tanjana from Gauteng Provincial Legislature. To date, as we would understand as a panel, South Africa is plagued with sheer violence, harassment, and abuse of women daily. Violence against women can be classified under the term of gender-based violence. And GBV has different elements such as femicide, rape culture, domestic violence, female trafficking, and mutilation. I'm going to take this moment to give the comrades on the panel an opportunity to give an input on our topic for today. I will start with Comrade Kabo.
Let me do. Can you hear me?
Yes, leader.
Okay, thank you. I think firstly, let me take this opportunity and thank Comrade Julie and the comrades of the PYA for organizing this session for us today, that we have a dialogue on these important issues that are affecting society. And that as the premise of my input, I thought it would be important that I raise already what I think we all know from the strategy and tactics of the document of the ANC, where particularly, remember our topic is law and justice in fighting gender-based violence and ending femicide. But just to say to comrades that this is as a result of what we characterized in the ANC and the movement as a whole as the what you call CST, colonialism of a special type, which identifies three interrelated, antagonistic contradictions of class, race, and patriarchal relations of power in our society. And that being said, comrades, our national oppression took that direction, but in the main, people who had suffered the most, women, African women in general, and blacks in particular, they have suffered the triple oppression. They were oppressed, firstly by being black, secondly, their gender, and obviously their patriarchal relations in society. But why am I raising this as a premise of our discussion? I'm raising this because the latter aspect, these patriarchal relations of power, I must indicate that patriarchal societies are ancient and they predate, capitalism. I'm trying to give, a nexus between patriarchal society and capitalism. And this is why it was easier later, as capitalism came in, it was easier to assimilate into patriarchal nature of the society that we have today. Meaning that what maintains the patriarchal order in our society in the main is the capitalist society that we have become. Capitalism that has assimilated itself into the already ancient patriarchal nature of our society. Something that I think we should be able to raise, because fundamentally, if you are to deal with gender-based violence and to understand what causes femicide in our country, we've got to understand the underlying structural features. And this is where I'm giving a nexus between the patriarchal power relations and the arrival of capitalism, which at the very center, this capitalism is deeply violent. We know how colonialism has taken place. I can go to a great length talking about the great historic injustice, the disposition of our people from their land, how capital, the formation of capital in South Africa, and how it consolidated itself. But in the main, it was followed by genocides and the massacring of the masses of our people, deeply violent. And which takes me to this point that as a country, as a result of this great historic injustice, we find ourselves in a situation where we are a deeply violent country. I mean, just lucky if I can just share the stats. Just in 2018 year, financial year, if I were to put it that way, South Africa recorded about 21,000 murders. All right, 21,000 murders were recorded, and this is a report that came from the South African police services. And of those numbers, you have about 2,093 which are femicide, and 985 are children. Now, this is a society that is trapped into what Fanon characterized as the nervous condition, that the genocides that came with the great historic injustice, later affirmed and asserted by the apartheid South Africa, is what is haunting our nation, that we've become deeply violent. And coming closer to our discussion of gender-based violence, it's as a result of a system. Now we've got to grapple with a system that creates conditions favorable for this violence to take place. So these are some of the issues that I think we've got to grapple with. And what is the...
Thank you, Comrade Kabo. I just want to give Comrade Shambal an opportunity to also, based on the issues that you have raised, to give an input of whether we have responsive and impactful policies, laws, and programs, initiatives to address the issues that you have raised. Comrade Shambala?
Yes, thank you, comrades. Greetings to the leadership that is present with us as well. I like the fact that you gave Comrade Khabu space to speak first, because he's raising quite important issues that from a legislation perspective, we have seen our legislators seeking to respond to as early as the introduction of the Domestic Violence Act in 1998. And I want to say, comrades, South Africa is not unique in this regard. We are not the only country that is experiencing challenges from a femicide perspective. However, what is important is for us to highlight what is it that a government has done in response to the cry that we have heard in seeking to respond to issues of femicide in the country. Without wasting time, we are aware that there are laws that have been put in place, the Domestic Violence Act and the Sexual Offences Act that came later in 2007, which were seeking to address multiple facets of this type of criminality that is happening in the country, from physical abuse, from sexual abuse, from verbal abuse perspective, from an emotional abuse perspective, from harassment, stalking. So there are many issues that our legislation that has been introduced and adopted by the National Assembly has been seeking to address. But it is clear that from an implementation perspective, we are experiencing gaps. And I think it is those gaps now that the legislatures must focus on, must enhance its oversight in trying to understand what is it that the departments that are custodians of these pieces of legislation, namely our social development legislation department that looks after the domestic violence at large. And our Department of Justice that has been entrusted with the enforceable provisions and with enforcement and with the protection via our judiciary system. What is it that is giving them challenges? Because it is clear that the women out there are complaining. They are saying the process of protection by the courts is slow. They are crying that bail applications are granted to people that later harass them, and they end up getting forced to actually go and drop these cases that they have recorded. Women are going out there to go and record and complain to SAPS, but we have discovered that these cases are not actually finding the space in court. They have cried about the SAPS not being empowered to understand the plight of a woman that has been victimized. When they go and lay the complaints, the sexual offenses units are not empowered. And those are the tasks that I think the legislators, in their task to oversee on oversight, need to get to the bottom of and try and understand what is it that is difficult for departments to implement and follow up. Why are the units that have been set up and the programs that have been set up by departments actually not working? What are the delays in terms of the victim support services bill that the Department of Social Development has promised to introduce, which we think it's quite an important piece of legislation, because there are measures that need to be put in place from a victim's perspective, that particular piece of legislation can actually do a lot to assist. How can these departments be assisted? The collaboration issues with other organs of state. So there are many things that we need to look at from a legislature perspective that must be outlined and find ways of making it easy for the implementation of all these laws that are seeking to prohibit these issues. Yes, thank you.
For the input. Now, Kabo, you have raised serious issues referencing the strategy and tactics of the ANC about triple operations and where we come from as a society and as a country. Now, with measures to address the COVID-19 pandemic in place, such as restrictions on movement, financial instability, and all those things that are caused by the crisis. How, at this point, from the background that you have raised, how do you think this has impacted on ensuring that, for lack of a better word, women remain oppressed and find themselves in a situation where they are being abused?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what the pandemic has done, there are a number of what I can call the nervous conditions. I mean, the nervous conditions that women generally are subjected to, and they stay side by side with their own oppressors, which it's us men in the main in our households. And as in when all of us are affected badly by this pandemic, whether depression as a result of not having access to movement, not having access to the resources that we used to have, that have been severely impacted by the pandemic, and we unleash that frustration on women. And I think it is deeply, deeply, deeply problematic. But what is mostly problematic, Lucky, it's that it's not that all these things are happening or taking place without the law. So it's one thing to have the law in the country. It is another to implement the law, as Shambhala was raising earlier on, from a point of view of legislators. Like, for instance, a person that gets to be killed or murdered, firstly, they would go, I mean, it's an abuse that takes, time. They go to the police station and they lodge a protection order. That protection order, it's there on paper, but does not protect the people. I mean, does not protect women. not only women, but anyone who says I need protection and ask for the lodges a protection order, they get that order on paper, but it never happens. Now, the other fundamental problem is that how do we move from creating laws? Because seemingly the problem that we have, it's not the laws that we have. No, it's how do we optimize this law in such a manner that people they seek to protect are protected. Now, we need to find ways in which such laws can be optimized, people can be protected from the laws. And the other important aspect, like I can't leave this discussion without raising it, is what I call institutional fundamentalism. Now, what do I mean by that? Every time in the country, we don't get a fatigue of creating institutions. Now, if there's a problem of gender-based violence, the president will meet some advisors who give pathetic advices at times. I'm sorry for saying that, it's an ANC platform, but for sure I'm also an academic in my own rights. It's a view I'm raising, that they would say, let's establish a committee or an institution to address the problem. Now, once that institution is established, it does not solve the problem. It institutionalizes the problem. Now, we have a fundamental problem. Like I'll give a typical example. As way of responding to this gender-based violence, government has put in place now what is called the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence. What the president says in the foreword of that NSP, he says, we're going to put in place a national council. All right, Lucky. We're going to put in place a national council by the end of April 2020, which is going to help with the victims of gender-based violence and the survivors. It is deeply, deeply problematic. Why am I saying that? The same thing, Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe, in 2012, on the 11th of December, closing the 16 days of activism, he went on to say, he was in Rustenburg. He said, he was launching the very same council that the president is going to appoint by April next year. Now the question is, what has been the successes of what we've put in place? Now it goes back to the problem of institutional fundamentalism. We create this and that, but in the process we institutionalize the problems instead of resolving those problems.
Just in conclusion, Kabo, there's a question from the floor by Tsepolitea, which says, what's unique about SA that's making it more violent? Surely there are more other countries that have had similar conditions. Now, can you take a bite on that question from the floor in 30 seconds so that we can go back to Comrade Shamba?
Okay, look, what the South African context would be different in terms of how the genocides in our country, those that formed the great historic injustice, how it took place. Now, as a result, I am saying, beyond talking about gender-based violence, South Africa is generally a violent society. Any protest that takes place, it becomes violent. It is a problem that I think we need to go back to that discussion around the reconstruction and development program of the soul to really deal with the psychological, challenges that South African nation suffers from as a result of colonialism and colonialism of a special type. It is a debate that has not been held to say, how do we begin to address it? And because of capitalism, South Africa will continue to be violent. Capitalism is the very condition that enables violence to take place. For example, if I am a husband or I am a boyfriend and I'm unable to provide opulence that other young people provide to their girlfriend, in order for me to reassert myself, I want to use the violence. It's the social relations that exist as a result of what the capitalist system creates that is deeply problematic. And you are likely to find similarities elsewhere in other countries where capitalism is in charge.
Thank you, Kabo. Comrade Shamala, there's a question from the floor, which in your put, I want you to respond to it. In fighting gender-based violence, do we think as various components of the alliance and the PYA particularly, are there Are they in communities to mobilize communities and make a required impact? What has contributed to our failure to influence and lead society? In addition to that, you have raised the JPV Act, which only, to my satisfaction, has only a protection order, which is not that effective. But we also have other and other legislation laws able to resolve this challenge that women face. How can we bridge the gap to ensure that they are?
Okay, something is disturbing our facilitator this side. If people can just mute their mics as well. Okay, thank you, comrades. You know, one of the important things that we need to realize, and I'll say this again, South Africa is not unique to this challenge. It's just that South Africa communicates, is very transparent when it comes to any challenging issues that we face as a country. In response to the question on the floor, there are many programs that have been developed by the departments that have been tasked to look into these issues of domestic violence. But there is no follow-up in that regard. We don't need to create another policy framework, because the ones that we currently have not been tested from an implementation perspective. And this has been one of the frustrations of the portfolio committees in the legislature and in the National Assembly, where programs are not yielding the result that they have been planned for. So we need to pull our socks as legislatures up and say, we are going to be more strict. Once the president uses the word pandemic, you know, last year in September, he used the word crisis. This year, he has used the word pandemic, which means then it's not going to be business as usual. Legislatures are now supposed to panic and say, let's call upon the departments and check what is it that they are not winning in implementing as per the promises that they have made. All these programs seem not to be yielding the result that has been set for. You cannot, for example, put a woman that has applied for an interdict in the same house as the person that they are afraid of. So that means the shelters, there must be something that the shelters are doing. Are the shelters actually working the same or yielding the result that they were set up for? So there must be a process of visiting those shelters from legislature perspective. And we need to get to the root cause of that is making our alliances. Now let's wear a political cap. I'm going to speak as a comrade. What is it that our alliances are doing that is working? How can we partner with our community-based organizations as the ANC? What is the role of the councillor that has been nominated by the people? How is the whistle blown in communities that seeks to make the response easier for women when they are crying in the communities? What is it that our brothers and sisters, etc., can do as a community together when the police have not yet arrived? Because these crimes are happening in our communities. So youth in the communities, those branches of our alliances and the ANC need to be visible as well, so that these structures that have been developed by legislatures, by departments, can actually find it easy to infiltrate our challenges as women immediately at the root level where the crime is actually happening. So these issues of oppression of women are not only starting now and cannot be only taken from the top at provincial level where the legislature is sitting, where the National Assembly is sitting. No, they must start at local government level. The terms of reference of our councillors at ward level must actually change now to say President has used the word pandemic. We are therefore now changing how we work as councillors as well, to include a scope of establishing street committees that are focused on gender-based violence as well. So I thought I should raise that, Chairperson, before we talk about the review of laws. We need to start at local government level and indicate what is going to happen from the protection of and the implementation of the laws affecting Abomam. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Shambala. Unfortunately, our time has lapsed, but we should continue to have dialogues on gender equality, gender-based violence, consent, and dismantling the cultural norms that exist in our society, as well as power relations between men and women, as raised by Comrade Krabo at the beginning. Now, in conclusion, I just want to say that women in this country have a legitimate claim to walk peacefully on the streets, to enjoy their shopping and their entertainment, to go and come back from work, and to enjoy the peace and tranquility of their homes without fear. I want to call on all men to take a stand against gender-based violence, to protect women wherever they are, and our structures to play an active role in society to ensure that we combat gender-based violence. Thank you, Comrade Julie, for this opportunity. Thank you, Comrade Krabo. Thank you, Comrade Shambala. Let's continue to have these conversations in all platforms that we are in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will quickly rush to our last panel of the day. Comrade Karabo, Comrade Tasneem, Comrade Parks, are you still with us?
Yes, we're here.
Awesome. Over to you, Bosso.
Thank you very much, Comrade Julie. We've got a very, very academic topic, but we're going to try to make it as simple as possible so that all young people can be able just to follow through. So the topic that we have today is governance in driving fiscal and monetary policy to create jobs for young people. So in essence, we're just going to be speaking about money. And in top of that money, we're going to find out what it is that is happening to the 350 that was promised to young people in the main that are unemployed. We're going to start with Comrade Parks. Comrade Parks, are you there? Can you hear me?
Good afternoon, thank you. I'm here.
Yes, okay. We're going to give you both 4 minutes, both yourself and Comrade Tasneem. I'm going to pose questions to you. You answer them within 4 minutes. We've got a very limited time, so we must try to keep it as short as possible. So before you come in, I'm going to just put out a few bold statements that I think as we're having the conversation, we must be able to respond to. 1, the economy is racially biased. 2, the economy is homophobic. 3, the economy is sexist. 4, the economy is anti-youth. And 5, the economy is anti-the disabled. So my first question to you, Comrade Parks, is that with what I just said, that the economy is racially biased, we're discussing the fiscal and the monetary policy. How can we use policy to transform the lives of our people and to ensure that the economy is as inclusive as possible?
Well, thank you very much. In line with the area that we're discussing, I think it's about the deployment of both fiscal and monetary tools and policies as a means of facilitating economic growth and a deliberate bias. And I'm just going to raise a few examples about areas where we're either intervening or areas that would require some form of intervention. The first is a point that was raised by Comrade Sputler earlier around infrastructure investment. So looking at infrastructure investment as a means of counter-cyclical deployment of resources so that when you deploy infrastructure, it is done in a manner that empowers local companies, youth-owned companies, Black-owned enterprises, and maximizes opportunities for employment to local communities. In that way, you get both taxes that are able to be paid to government, so you're having value that accrues to government because you're using local enterprises, the money is deployed locally, but you also are able to ensure that you create jobs and enterprises at a local level. At a second level, you could employ tools such as, for example, a point that has been raised consistently by comrades in COSAS around prescribed assets. And this is about saying that many of the resources, pensioner money, the bulk of the pensioner money is controlled by asset managers. Those asset managers determine the portfolio of investments they are able to put the money in. And a lot of these resources from pensioners is essentially put into instruments that don't necessarily contribute towards economic growth. So the argument around prescribing assets is to say that a certain percentage of the assets that are in the control of asset managers, therefore our own money as pensioners, as investors in pension funds is deployed in such a way that it grows the economy. So in that way, you can say, we're going to prescribe that not only should the money go towards local enterprises, it should have spatial targeting. It should also have targeting about Black enterprise development. So that's about utilizing fiscal tools as a means of economic growth. Another, which is the last example I'll make, is an argument that has been raised around Section 12J of the Income Tax Act, which allows that venture capital companies can claim taxes of the areas in which they invest. But many of this money is currently not active. So by changing the rules that says, utilize Section 12J to ensure that this money goes towards infrastructure development, Black enterprise development, and youth development, you can be able to use this as a fiscal tool. The last 2 points I thought I should make, I hope I'm still within the time, is about the deployment of monetary policies, which in my mind is a twin. It's almost the other side of the coin of fiscal policy in a macroeconomic strategy. And monetary policies are those that are deployed by the Reserve Bank. Now, 2 critical interventions have been made by the Reserve Bank recently, and I think that we need to enhance the way in which we look at the role of the Reserve Bank in protecting the economy and in facilitating economic growth and development. The first is about quantitative easing. It is essentially the Reserve Bank identifying resources at the disposal of the Reserve Bank to deploy into the economy and create greater liquidity in the economy and therefore enable the economy to grow. Recently, the Reserve Bank has made a conscious decision that it will deploy resources in buying government bonds so that we don't have to go to international markets and we are able to then shore up the local government, in this instance, the national government bonds that are funded through international means. So there's a debate in the country, does this constitute quantitative easing? I certainly think that we've gone far way down the line in terms of quantitative easing by doing this. It's about putting money into the local economy so that it grows. The second is an intervention that reduces the repo rate, which is the interest rate that is charged. So by reducing the repo rate, you are by extension reducing the interest rate that is charged by banks to consumers. In that way, you enable people both to be able to, you facilitate the debt capital market so that people can borrow cheaper money and invest in the local economy. Now, the question we need to engage with is, how does this translate in the context of youth development and local enterprise development? So it should not just be about deploying these resources into the economy, but it should be done in a way that is deliberate as to which parts of the economy should be able to benefit from this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Parks. Well, young people might differ with you there. Look, we strongly believe that the economy is not localized. Young people still need to travel to cities, to towns, to find employment, to find opportunities. There are no opportunities in the townships. There are no opportunities in the villages where they are situated. So the economy has not been taken to young people. It has not been localized. But we're going to come back to you. Let's go to Comrade Tasneem. Comrade Tasneem is a former youth leader. Why must young people trust the ANC government? just yesterday, just a few days ago, when the minister presented the midterm speech, he spoke about cutting the education budget with about 5 billion rand plus. So how do young people trust this ANC government that was saying it's pro-youth, but in action, it's actually not? Because the majority of people that actually benefit from this education budget are those that have been disenfranchised and from previously disadvantaged backgrounds.
Yes, thanks, Comrade Karabo, and good afternoon, comrades. And thanks for the opportunity to participate in such a fruitful discussion. I think perhaps what we need to be able to do is maybe interrogate some of the reasons behind why we would have budget cuts. And I think maybe let's start with what we had discussed from the beginning of the session with Comrade Sputla, raising the fact that, for instance, government has decreased its spending in sectors of the economy that can turn out jobs and expand the income base of the country. So we sit with a position now where we have a shrinking and a shrinking and continuously shrinking income base for the country, which is the tax base. Also, the investments have lowered and dropped. Also, the fact that government spending has also been more geared towards social spending as opposed to economic spending. And that has led to the high unemployment figures that we have, the high joblessness that we have. And then added to all of that, we see the ratings agencies, what they've done to our rating status. Coupled to that also is then the fact that our debt to GDP has increased and ballooned so much. So the fact is that you can only spend what you have unless you go, of course, into the debt market. And we know that the fact that our ratings are not so favorable, that the cost of that debt is exponentially high. Given all of that, we have to make budget decisions and decisions on the budgets, and the reality is budget cuts. Of course, I think the 5 billion decreased in terms of budget spending or allocated towards education. We also need to ask a question is, the question that we also need to ask is how much of underspending has taken place in the various departments. So the minister raises a question about zero-rated budgeting versus incremental budgeting, which we have now. So what we have is an incremental budget regime where you just increase on your baseline. However, also coupled with that is the fact that you have departments that just don't spend their money. So as shocking as it may sound that we have this 5 billion decrease in the budget allocated to education, it may actually be a corrective measure towards just correcting the baseline because the department has not been spending. But it's something that we do need to interrogate. Of course, in interrogating that, I think for us, we need to be able to say to young people that even with the decrease in spending in education by 5 billion, education will still receive, education, health, and social spending will still receive the bulk of the budget. And of course, young people benefit directly from, especially if you are in a previously disadvantaged community, you have not had access to private sector, either education or health, government still will cushion the social amenities needed for you to be able to prosper and access what you need. I think Comrade Parks raises an important question, though, that we also need to be able to respond to, is just the fact that we have heavily relied on government spending to be able to get us out of all our problems. So, and that's a combination of the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. So the monetary policy, what does the Reserve Bank do? And then what does the fiscal policy then do to complement what is happening in the monetary space? And we've got to get to a space where we answer, is the Reserve Bank doing enough to be able to respond to what the monetary position is in our space, so that the fiscal policy can really augment what the monetary policy has been. And I think the Reserve Bank is leaning towards beginning to do some of that. And of course, young people and ourselves, we've got to agitate that the Reserve Bank does much more, because you can't have a separatist approach where the Reserve Bank sits somewhere separately, divorced from what happens in the fiscal space. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Comrade Tasneem, for your input. I'm going to pose this question to Comrade Parks. Why are we not taxing corporates in the conversation that we're having? Why are we always so quick as well to tax normal citizens, you know, those that are in the majority living in poverty? Why are we not holding those that evade tax accountable so that we can be able to increase the budget that we have as a country? Comrade Parks?
Well, thank you very much. I think we should accept that, in fact, government does tax corporates, and that taxing corporates is based on the income that they receive. And there's always an important balance to strike. How do we ensure that we levy taxes that give government the resources that it requires to deploy into South Africa, but how do we do it in such a way that also incentivizes the private sector to grow and to create jobs and contribute towards the economic growth of the country? So in many ways, it is about that balancing act in relation to at what level do you place corporate tax in a manner that does not tax them into non-existence, but ensure that you maximize the amount of tax that you are able to generate from both corporates and private citizens. And as I said, it is being done, and it's always a difficult balancing act for the Ministry of Finance to ensure that it does not overtax business and therefore find us in a situation where they don't have an incentive to invest in the economy.
Thank you very much, Comrade Parks. Let's just go to some, we've got questions here in the chat. We have a question from Isaiah to Comrade Parks. When we prescribe assets, we as workers must be comfortable with lower retirement incomes if the assets underperform. The savings culture in our country is very poor. Aren't we then running the risk of increased dependency on the state by those in retirement? Comrade Parks?
Well, thank you. Let me start by saying that prescribing assets does not necessarily imply that the investments that would be made would be in a non-productive sector. We need to be able to protect the pensions of the investors, which would be the pensioners of this country. So it needs to be done in a manner that is prudent, in a manner that would ensure that they are able to generate revenue, and in a manner that can contribute towards the economic growth in the country. I just want to make one point around this matter of prescribed assets and a whole range of issues that are to do with proposals around how do we deploy pensioner money in the country. It is in the interest of pensioners that in fact we protect the economy of the country and therefore the value of the money that they have in their pensions. So sitting and saying, well, we're not going to protect that money by intervening through means such as prescribed assets means that the only people that benefit are the asset managers. Because if the inflation rate goes up at a phenomenal rate, it will impact the price or the cost of the money to the pensioner. It would reduce the value of the money that the pensioner has. So when we're talking about this, it is equally about protecting the value of the asset that the pensioners have, which is the money that they've invested into their pensions. Thanks, Comrade Karam.
Thank you very much, Comrade Parks. We're going to move to Comrade Tasneem. We have a question for you. And this question is based on the wild call by the Youth League of Radical Economic Transformation, in the main speaking towards nationalization. The question is there political will to transfer structural power and the means of production from the minority to the majority?
So let me say yes and no. I think the reality is that as the ANC, and we would have seen that especially in our last elective conference, there were our conference could be characterized as having two very opposing views just around the structure of the economy. And it almost led to quite a divided conference. And I think the reality is that I don't think that those in like ourselves in power, in state power, have used the levers that we have at our disposal at the fullest and to the benefit of really changing the structure of the economy instead of tinkering with it. So, for instance, I would argue that the budget, for an example, that the Minister of Finance and the issues that he raised about the budgeting, whether it's zero-based budgeting or incremental budgeting, I don't think that's going to change the structure of the economy at all. All it's going to do is really, it's almost a administrative exercise as to which type of budgeting you use. Does that translate into the actual economy and the structure of the economy changing? It doesn't. What do we need to be able to do to address the structure of the economy is that we've got to look at the sectors of our country that have built the economy. Where are they today? How have they performed maybe over the last 20 years? Are they resilient or not? And then what is it that needs to be able to change within those structures? So, for example, our economy has been built on importantly cheap labor and the mining sector or the primary sector. The mining sector is not doing as well as it used to even 30 years ago. Shedding jobs, even with the advent of 4IR, just the mechanizing, et cetera, and there's a whole lot of reasons why the mining sector is not done well. But also labor, the cheap labor that was built, that built our economy, is no longer as cheap. We can argue whether it is or isn't. So you have other sectors of society who have, other sectors of the economy, sorry, that have remained extremely resilient. One of them would be, for instance, the financial services sector, and greatly untransformed, very, very regulated, even over-regulated, but has remained robust and resilient throughout different economic conditions. So we had the different economic recessions. We're in one now, effectively. We also effectively in one of the greatest states of economic depression post possibly the Second World War because of the advent of COVID. However, the financial services sector has been able to withhold and go through all of those storms. Comrade Parks also speaks about just the asset managers. How is it that asset managers have been able to continuously remain resilient and profit making throughout? So there are those sectors of the economy that remain untransformed, and that I think that as the ANC-led government are actually quite afraid to tamper with and dismantle or create sectors that equal or players that equal those sectors in the economy that can compete with them on an equal footing. I think if we look at how the apartheid system was built, it was built on that premise that every sector of society, every sector of the economy was established to be able to support and drive a particular agenda, both politically, socially, and economically. And I don't think we've done that adequately. We can argue about even just the laws that we've been able to pass as the ANC-led government. They, in effect, have allowed even for big business, established business, those that control the economic heights of our systems, to be able to remain intact with very, very little shaking. And of course, what happens is if we argue and begin making a noise about whether we temper and change the structure of the economy, we are often threatened with capital flight, leaving the country, disinvestment. We are seeing a lot of disinvestment, yes, but I also think it's because the state hasn't invested adequately the way it should. So you have almost a cat and mouse situation where let's see how much you put, then we'll put sort of situation. And you can't have a situation where the private sector invests more than the public sector. It shouldn't be that way, especially in a developmental state such as ours.
Thank you so much, Comrade Tasneem and Comrade Parks. We really do hope that we can have an even larger discussion and be given more time to actually expatiate on this topic. It's a very, very important topic for especially young people to have. What I know that we have learned today is that transformation is deliberate. it is intentional. It's not going to come overnight, but there must be rigorous will for there to be implementation. Thank you so much for tuning in. Over to you, Comrade Julie. Unmute yourself, leadership. Unmute.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, Comrade Tazim, Comrade Parks, and Comrade Karabo. I think the conversation was very insightful. It's like we want more. We're not ready to leave, but we unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Without wasting any further time, I'm going to hand over to the PS, Comrade Kawe. If you can please just give us a vote of thanks, but also Comrade Kawe, if you can give us some input in terms of Bosso Mang in the battle of ideas that have taken place today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For a moment, I thought I shouldn't do the vote of thanks because I was struggling, thinking, how do I thank Comrade Sputla, Comrade Parks, Comrade Tasneem for doing the little job they've done today. So it's a bit, it's a taste. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay. Yes, we can.
Yes, sure. We all can. So I'm saying they have given us the introduction. So instead of thanking them, I just want to invite them again, together with the PYA, to do more sessions of this nature. But that the PYA leadership must set up a secretariat that would follow up on some of the issues so as we can develop a program. The PEC, ANC, PC, Lekgotla did agree on a program to revive the PYA, and such engagements fall exactly into that program of the revival of the PYA. I must say that the discussions were at a higher level, demonstrate the call for the youth to champion their own interest. So I'm not thanking them. But let me just elaborate on one point Comrade Sputla raised when he was asked a question. In all what we are saying, where's the youth, how do we benefit, and so on. And he made a point about the youth not waiting for the invite. And I want to put in a political perspective there. The youth have a responsibility to build and identify their mission. And once they have identified their mission, they also make a determination whether they want that mission to fail or to succeed. In doing so, they shouldn't worry much about whether the old creates a space. They're saying to themselves, for us to achieve our mission, anything that stands as an obstacle must be destroyed. And that's where Comrade Sputla was drawing, and I thought I should add. So your mission to access information cannot be placed in the hands of those who are in government. They must be engaged. They must be engaged politely. They must be engaged in a sense of building cooperation with them. But if they are not, the young people must choose confrontation. Because you shouldn't have a group of young people, particularly who are aligned with the movement, who negotiate future, who enters into a discussion on their future from a request point of view. We are where we are today as South Africans, and I'm sure in many countries in the world, because the young people there did not request for their future. They engaged in a struggle against any obstacle on their future. And I remember in the Youth League, there was a popular slogan. It sounded like a rhetoric and a slogan, but it was very profound. And it used to say, "We are the future. No one can stop us." Young people today must stand against drug abuse, must stand against gender abuse, must stand against unemployment, must stand against lack of access to education, must stand against lack of quality of education, must stand against no provision of skills, and they must say, all these constitute a struggle against our future. And therefore, we're entering not in antagonism, but in radical relationship with all of you. And I thought I should elaborate that point. The second point I think we should elaborate is if we want to build an economy, whether it's water, energy, electricity, infrastructure, transport, road, it shouldn't be the youth that ask government, where is our space? It should be young people who enter that space with no fear. And if that youth, it's in the ANC, it's in the PYA, the future of the ANC to continue to govern, it's safe. But if that debate is outside the youth of the ANC, the youth in the PYA, the future of the ANC to govern is at risk. So the young people must not relate to the ANC as if they need ANC for opportunities. The ANC also need youth to continue to govern South Africa. For us to continue governing Gauteng, Mayanga played a big role in mobilizing young women. But because we had a weak youth structures, PYA, we got the results we have. If we want to govern and continuously govern so as to achieve the goals in the National Democratic Revolution, we need vibrant, dynamic, energetic, and fearless young people who are well informed. So to the organizers of this session, I thank you for creating the opportunity, but we have not done your job. I have calculated the participants in the discussions. I'm not happy. I have listened to the discussions, and at the core, I think the message is we need this at a bigger scale. We need at least an hour with Sputra, an hour with Comrade Parks, an hour with Comrade Tasneem, an hour with Comrade Fassi, an hour with Kosatu. But we need more or less a seminar. And I want to commit Comrade Parks and his capacity as a provincial treasurer that we need at least 2 days for this session. And this session must revive PYA. Out of this 2 days session, which I'm sponsoring, you know, I'm doing different vote of thanks, typical ANC leader. So out of these 2 sessions, each structure of the PYA must say, we will take this program, you take this program, we take that program, and all these small programs coming to one port will represent proper youth development perspective. And for that, I thank the participant. For that, I thank the organizers, for those who presented, and who have given meaning to the Youth Month, and we must take it from here. And I want to thank you for inviting me, and it was good to come to listen. And I've listened to everything, including the progressive criticism about how when we have a problem and a challenge, we go to the academics, the academics set a commission, and the commission advise on a lot of issues without solving a problem. I guess that is profound. That we shouldn't ask for more advice in dealing with the problem, but we should focus on dealing with the problem. So it was a good day for me on behalf of the PEC of the ANC in Gauteng. Thank you to the organizers. Comrade Julie, as I was with you in the morning, I am sure in history, this day will represent to you an initiative. All struggle starts with an initiative. One young fellow in Libya did not take the initiative he took. He took his life for Libya to understand that time has come to build democracy and recognize the young people. It took Solomon Mahlangu's life for us to be where we are. For you, it took you, your effort, the day, and I want to invite many to join you, many to join the SASCO comrades, to join COSAS, to join YCL, and we must reduce focusing on internal political matters and focus on serving the young people. And I want to thank you. It was a good session, and congratulations for having this session. All the best. The youth challenges are bigger, and the young people must say to the elders, we are not a problem, we are a future. You are a problem today because our future doesn't look good with you. And therefore, we're embarking on a relationship that is confrontational or a relationship that is cooperative. Choose which side you want to be. Thank you very much.
Unmute, Julie.
I should mute, eh?
Yes. Thank you, Comrade PS, for that the closing remarks. Perhaps we can rephrase it as that. It has been very encouraging, and it has also given us a line of march. Comrade Sputla, Comrade Tasneem, Comrade Parks, Comrade Fasia, Comrade Karabo, Comrade Shamala, Comrade Lucky, Comrade Patu, Comrade Khabo, and all the other comrades that I've not mentioned. Please keep your phone lines open. We will continue the conversation and unpack it further. The video, as we've already mentioned, the audio recording the video recording of our entire session will be flighted on our Facebook pages. The conversation will continue with young people on social media, which we will then take as inputs going to the next sessions. But our line of march has been given, our program of action has been given by the PS, and we shall continue as such. We want to be able to say, in the time of the COVID pandemic, archives of that session or of this period had young people discussing and young people theorizing practical ways for the development of Gauteng, as well as the development of South Africa going forward. So as such, I would like to thank you all for coming. Thank you all for participating. Those in the chat box, we've not forgotten you. We thank you for your inputs and your comments, which will take further in improving the program. With that said, I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to unmute and say their goodbyes. You can all go crazy at once. Thank you very much. Amanda.
Away too.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Away too. Hey, Bo.
Thank you, comrade. Normally there should be a song. You know, usually we sing. So maybe Comrade Khabo, lead us with a song there. Just move us with a song.
I'm challenged in that department.
You know. You know,
there was an attempt from COSAS. Maybe this is the time.
Yes, where's Comrade COSAS? Comrade Stalin.
Where is Stalin?
Still with us.
Tammy, that hat of yours.
Yes, lead us with the song,
ahead,
but thank you. Thank you, comrade. You can all leave.
Thank
you. Like a Zionist. Molo Shambhala. Molo Shambhala.
Molo mphathi.
Ndikuvile uthetha ngemithetho endingayenziyo right.